He laughed in my face at the dinner table, calling me just a housewife in front of everyone. The next morning, his face turned ghost white when I walked into his office as the new owner of his company. 5 years of hiding my success was worth it just to see that moment. The elegant dining room of Le Rêve buzzed with conversation, crystal glasses clinking against fine china as Carter Stewart held court at the center table. I smoothed the napkin over my lap, my practiced smile never wavering as my husband's voice carried across the restaurant. "Gentlemen, my Elsa here is the perfect example of domestic bliss. She's mastered the art of being just a housewife." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Carter's laughter echoed as he raised his glass of 30-year-old scotch. His business associates shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, eyes darting between us. I maintained my composure, the mask I'd perfected over 8 years of marriage firmly in place. To Carter and his colleagues, I was simply the supportive wife who managed our beautiful home, planned his dinner parties, and knew better than to interrupt when the men were talking business. What Carter didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover, was that while he dismissed my little hobby of restaurant investing, I had quietly built Nova Hospitality Group into the fastest-growing restaurant empire on the West Coast. And tomorrow morning, my company would be finalizing its acquisition of Stewart Enterprises, the very company my husband had built his identity around. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman he considered incapable of understanding balance sheets now controlled his financial future. But for tonight, I would play my part one last time. I would be just a housewife for a few more hours. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be Carter's crowning achievement, impressing Lana Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Investments, whose company was considering a major partnership with Stewart Enterprises. Carter had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, convinced it would cement his reputation as one of the city's most formidable businessmen. "Another round for the table," Carter called to the server, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension he reserved for service staff. He didn't notice how the server's eyes flicked toward me in recognition, or the slight nod I gave in return. As owner of Le Rêve, I knew every member of my staff by name, but Carter had never once questioned why we always seemed to get the best table despite the restaurant's exclusive reputation. "You know what makes a successful man?" Carter's voice grew louder as he leaned forward, words slightly slurred from his third scotch. "Having a wife who knows her place. Elsa here has perfected it. No ambitions beyond our home, no silly career dreams competing with mine. Just a housewife, and that's exactly what I need." I observed the uncomfortable glances around the table, mentally noting each reaction. Jessie Martinez, Meridian's CFO, twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed during our private meeting last week. Matt Donovan from Archer Capital checked his watch for the third time. And Lana Blackwood's perfectly arched eyebrow raised just slightly as she caught my eye across the arrangement of orchids. If Carter hadn't been so focused on his own voice, he might have noticed the knowing looks exchanged between me and the executives. If he hadn't been 3 drinks in, he might have questioned why Meridian's top brass seemed more interested in his wife's reactions than his rehearsed pitch about market penetration strategies. "Sarah here couldn't tell a profit margin from a grocery list," Carter continued, warming to his favorite topic. "Last month she asked me about our company's acquisition strategy. Can you imagine?" He laughed heartily, encouraging others to join in. A few weak chuckles followed. I felt my phone vibrate discreetly in my lap. A message from Chloe Winters, my COO. "Final paperwork signed. We're set for 9 a.m. announcement." Carter's hand fell heavily on my shoulder, with what others might mistake for affection. "Tell them, darling, about that time you tried to understand our quarterly reports." I placed my water glass down with deliberate precision, each movement measured, controlled, just like my response. "Actually," I began, my voice carrying that quiet authority I usually reserved for my own boardroom. I'd love to hear more about Meridian's expansion plans for the restaurant sector. Carter's laugh cut through the air. See what I mean? Adorable? Isn't she trying to participate in business talk? He turned to the table conspiratorially. Next thing you know, she'll be asking about market volatility and acquisition strategies. Lana Blackwood cleared her throat. Actually, Carter, I'd be very interested in hearing Elsa's thoughts on— Lana, Carter interrupted, his condescension thick enough to cut with the steak knives beside our plates. Let's not put Elsa on the spot. She's just a housewife, and a perfect one at that. Knows her place, doesn't try to meddle in things beyond her understanding. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I caught Jessie Martinez checking her phone beneath the table, no doubt seeing the same message I had received moments earlier. Several executives exchanged meaningful glances, and Matt Donovan was now openly frowning. In fact, Carter continued, oblivious to the tension in the room, I'll tell you a funny story. Last month, Elsa asked me about our company's expansion strategy. Can you believe it? He laughed heartily, encouraging others to join in. I felt my phone vibrate again. Press release drafted for approval. Stock certificates ready for transfer, Carter droned on about my supposed domestic limitations. I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 8 years ago, when we met, I had already launched my first restaurant. Carter had assumed it was a cute little project, funded by family money, a misunderstanding I never corrected. When that restaurant's success led to a second location, he dismissed it as beginner's luck. By our third anniversary, I owned 10 establishments across the city, operating under the umbrella of Nova Hospitality Group, a connection Carter never made to his wife with the expensive hobby. While he believed I was attending cooking classes and interior design workshops, I was actually closing deals and expanding my empire. The charity lunches he mockingly referenced were actually board meetings. The silly social media hobby he derided had built our restaurant's online presence into industry-leading digital brands. You know what they say. Carter raised his glass again. Behind every successful man is a woman who knows her limitations. And my Elsa here has accepted hers beautifully. No aspirations to be anything more than what she is. Just a housewife. The crystal glasses clinked half-heartedly as the table responded to his toast. I noticed Lana Blackwood's knuckles were white around her glass stem, and Matt Donovan was now openly checking his email. Carter, dear. I spoke up, my voice carrying that quiet authority. Perhaps we should discuss something else. He patted my hand condescendingly. See what I mean? Always looking out for my best interests. That's what a good wife does. Knows when to speak up and when to stay quiet. As dessert arrived, I declined the creme brulee, pleading a slight headache. In truth, I needed to make a quick call to finalize tomorrow's announcement. As I excused myself from the table, Carter's voice followed me. My wife wouldn't understand the complexities of what we do. She's better suited for planning our next dinner party. In the restaurant's private office, my office, though Carter had never bothered to ask why the staff always let me use it. I confirmed the final details with my executive team. The press release was ready. The stock certificates were prepared. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, Stewart Enterprises would officially be a subsidiary of Nova Hospitality Group. I studied my reflection in the mirror, remembering the exact moment 8 years ago when I decided to keep my professional identity separate from my marriage. Back then, it had seemed simpler to let Carter believe what he wanted about his wife's capabilities. But tonight's dinner had confirmed what I'd known for months. The time for hiding was over. As I reapplied my lipstick, my hand steady despite the anticipation building inside me, I could still hear Carter's words echoing. Just a housewife. Tomorrow. Morning? Those would be the most expensive words he had ever spoken. I maintained my composure, the mask I'd perfected over 8 years of marriage firmly in place. To Carter and his colleagues, I was simply the supportive wife who managed our beautiful home, planned his dinner parties. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, and knew better than to interrupt when the men were talking business. What Carter didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover, was that while he dismissed my little hobby of restaurant investing, I had quietly built Nova Hospitality Group into the fastest-growing restaurant empire on the West Coast. And tomorrow morning, my company would be finalizing its acquisition of Stewart Enterprises, the very company my husband had built his identity around. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman he considered incapable of understanding balance sheets now controlled his financial future. But for tonight, I would play my part one last time. I would be just a housewife for a few more hours. 18 years ago, I graduated top of my class from the Culinary Institute with dreams of owning not just a restaurant, but a hospitality empire. While my classmates focused on becoming executive chefs, I studied business models and real estate trends. I worked 80-hour weeks as a sous chef while taking night classes in finance and business administration. By 28, I had scraped together enough capital and investor confidence to open my first restaurant, Lumiere, in a struggling neighborhood that I correctly predicted would become the city's next dining hotspot. Lumiere was an immediate success, earning rave reviews for its innovative menu and warm ambiance. Within 18 months, I had recouped my initial investment and was scouting locations for a second venue. By the time I met Carter at 32, I owned 3 successful restaurants and was in negotiations for a 4th. Carter swept into my life like a hurricane. Handsome, charming, and successful, he represented everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Someone who understood ambition and drive, who wouldn't be intimidated by a strong woman building her own business. Our first date was at a charity gala where I'd donated a chef's tasting menu from Lumiere for the auction. He bid an outrageous amount, winning not just the dinner but my attention. "Let me guess," he'd said, handing me a champagne flute with that confident smile I'd later come to recognize as arrogance. "Interior design? Or maybe fashion?" I'd been amused rather than offended. "Restaurants, actually." "Ah, you work at a restaurant? Hostess? Manager?" he'd asked, his interest clearly piqued. I'd considered correcting him, explaining that I owned the restaurant where the gala was being held, along with 2 others. But something made me pause. There was something intriguing about his assumption, about being underestimated. Instead, I'd smiled enigmatically and replied, "Something like that." That night set the pattern for our entire relationship. Carter saw what he wanted to see, a beautiful woman with a cute little restaurant project that he assumed was funded by family money. I saw a potential partner who might appreciate my drive once he understood it. We were both wrong. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and glittering social events. Carter was generous, attentive, and seemingly supportive of what he called my hospitality hobby. When he proposed after just 4 months, I accepted, believing he would eventually see and appreciate the business acumen I possessed. The shift was subtle at first. During wedding planning, he started making more decisions without consulting me. "Don't worry your pretty head about the boring details," he'd say when I asked about finances. "I've got it handled." At first, I found it easier to let him take charge while I focused on opening my 4th restaurant, a decision I justified as pragmatic time management rather than the first compromise of many. By our first anniversary, the pattern was established. Carter would dismiss my opinions on business matters with a patronizing smile, while I retreated further into my separate professional identity. When my 5th restaurant opened to critical acclaim, he attended the launch party but spent the evening telling everyone how he'd encouraged his wife's little project while networking for his own business. That night, I made a decision that would shape the next 7 years. I would build my empire quietly, without seeking his approval or acknowledgement. As Nova Hospitality Group grew from 5 restaurants to 10, then 15, then beyond, I maintained the fiction that I was merely dabbling in restaurant consulting while focusing primarily on being Mrs. Carter Stewart. I hired a talented team who understood and respected my need for discretion. My executive meetings were disguised as charity committee gatherings. Industry networking events became cooking classes or interior design workshops in Carter's understanding. The strangest part was how easy it became. Carter, so observant and shrewd in his business dealings, was comically blind when it came to his wife's activities. He never questioned how my little hobby afforded me a private office or why renowned restaurateurs and investors would attend my charity fundraisers. He never wondered why I received calls at all hours or why I traveled regularly to restaurant conferences. His preconceived notion of who I was and what I was capable of created the perfect blind spot, one that allowed Nova Hospitality to expand rapidly without attracting his attention. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be Carter's crowning achievement, impressing Lana Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Investments, whose company was considering a major partnership with Stewart Enterprises. Carter had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, convinced it would cement his reputation as one of the city's most formidable businessmen. What he didn't realize was that Lana had been my mentor and business ally for years, that Meridian had already provided significant capital for Nova's expansion, and that this dinner was essentially theater, the final act before tomorrow's revelation. Another round for the table, Carter called to the server, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension he reserved for service staff. He didn't notice how the server's eyes flicked toward me in recognition, or the slight nod I gave in return. As owner of Le Rev, I knew every member of my staff by name, but Carter had never once questioned why we always seemed to get the best table despite the restaurant's exclusive reputation. Like so many things that should have been obvious, he saw only what he expected to see. You know what makes a successful man? Carter's voice grew louder as he leaned forward, words slightly slurred from his third scotch. Having a wife who knows her place. Elsa here has perfected it. No ambitions. Beyond our home, no silly career dreams competing with mine. Just a housewife. And that's exactly what I need. I observed the uncomfortable glances around the table, mentally noting each reaction. Jessie Martinez, Meridian's CFO, twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed during our private meeting last week. Matt Donovan from Archer Capital checked his watch for the 3rd time, and Lana Blackwood's perfectly arched eyebrow raised just slightly as she caught my eye across the arrangement of orchids. If Carter hadn't been so focused on his own voice, he might have noticed the knowing looks exchanged between me and the executives. If he hadn't been 3 drinks in, he might have questioned why Meridian's top brass seemed more interested in his wife's reactions than his rehearsed pitch about market penetration strategies. You know what they say? Carter raised his glass. Again. Behind every successful man is a woman who knows her limitations. And my Elsa here has accepted hers beautifully. No aspirations to be anything more than what she is, just a housewife. The crystal glasses clinked half-heartedly as the table responded to his toast. I noticed Lana Blackwood's knuckles were white around her glass stem, and Matt Donovan was now openly checking his email. Carter, dear, I spoke up, my voice carrying that quiet authority. Perhaps we should discuss something else. He patted my hand condescendingly. See what I mean? Always looking out for my best interests. That's what a good wife does. Knows when to speak up and when to stay quiet. As dessert arrived, I declined the crème brûlée, pleading a slight headache. In truth, I needed to make a quick call to finalize tomorrow's announcement. As I excused myself from the table, Carter's voice followed me. My wife wouldn't understand the complexities of what we do. She's better suited for planning our next dinner party. In the restaurant's private office, my office, though Carter had never bothered to ask why the staff always let me use it, I confirmed the final details with my executive team. The press release was ready. The stock certificates were prepared. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, Stewart Enterprises would officially be a subsidiary of Nova Hospitality Group. I studied my reflection in the mirror, remembering the exact moment 8 years ago when I decided to keep my professional identity separate from my marriage. Back then, it had seemed simpler to let Carter believe what he wanted about his wife's capabilities. But tonight's dinner had confirmed what I'd known for months. The time for hiding was over. As I reapplied my lipstick, my hand steady, despite the anticipation building inside me, I could still hear Carter's words echoing. Just a housewife. Tomorrow, morning, those would be the most expensive words he had ever spoken. Returning to the dining room, I found Carter in rare form. The scotch had loosened his tongue further, and he was now fully committed to his impromptu lecture on gender roles in business. You see, gentlemen, and ladies, he gestured broadly toward Lana and Jessie. Women like my Elsa here, they don't have the killer instinct needed for big business. Right, darling? He winked at me as I took my seat, the crystal chandelier casting shadows across his self-satisfied smile. Tell them about that time you tried to understand our acquisition strategy, he continued, his words slurring slightly. I felt Lana Blackwood tense beside me, but I placed a subtle hand on her arm. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. Oh, Carter, I smiled, playing my part one last time. You know those business terms just confuse me. Exactly, Carter practically shouted, pointing at me with his glass. Leave the business to those who understand it. My wife here, she's happiest planning galas and choosing kitchen backsplashes. Isn't that right, sweetheart? Jessie Martinez cleared her throat. Actually, Carter, I'd be very interested in hearing Elsa's perspective on… Jessie, Carter interrupted, his condescension thick enough to cut with a knife. Let's not put Elsa on the spot. She's just a housewife, and a perfect one at that. Knows her place, doesn't try to meddle in things beyond her understanding. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I could see Matt Donovan checking his watch for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Several other executives were exchanging meaningful glances, and Lana was typing something on her phone beneath the table. In fact, Carter continued, oblivious to the tension he'd created, I'll tell you a funny story. Last week, Elsa asked me about our company's Pacific Northwest expansion. Can you believe it? He laughed heartily, encouraging others to join in. A few weak chuckles followed. I felt my phone vibrate again. A text from Chloe. Board members notified. Everyone on standby for tomorrow's announcement. I told her, Carter continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, to stick to planning our anniversary party instead. That's more her speed. Our marriage had settled into this pattern years ago. In the beginning, I had tried to engage with Carter about business. I remember bringing up an article I'd read about restaurant market expansion during our first year, together. He'd patted my head like a child and explained that business is complicated, sweetheart. After that, I realized it was easier to let him believe what he wanted to believe. Meanwhile, I was quietly building Nova Hospitality from a single neighborhood bistro into a restaurant empire spanning 3 states. Each time I acquired a new property or launched a new concept, Carter would notice my excitement and attribute it to women's things. Perhaps I'd redecorated our living room or found a new recipe to try. You know, Carter, Lana said, interrupting his monologue. Many of the most successful restaurant groups are now being led by women. The industry is changing. Carter waved his hand dismissively. Sure. They're good at the front-of-house stuff, making things pretty, greeting customers. But the financial side, the real business, that's where you need a man's analytical mind. I caught Jessie's eye across the table. As CFO of Meridian, she'd overseen billions in investments and was known for her razor-sharp financial acumen. Her slight headshake told me all I needed to know about what she thought of Carter's assessment. This was the exhausting reality I'd lived with for 8 years, watching my husband dismiss women's capabilities while I secretly outperformed him. in every business metric. Last quarter, Nova's profit margins were triple those of Stewart Enterprises, a fact Carter would discover tomorrow when our quarterly reports became public as part of the acquisition announcement. As I was saying, Carter continued, oblivious to the tension around him, business requires a certain instinct that women simply don't possess. No offense, ladies, he added with a wink toward Lana and Jessie. In the early days of our marriage, comments like these had stung. Now they simply fueled my determination. Each dismissal, each patronizing pat on the head, each time he referred to me as just a housewife, became another brick in the foundation of the empire I was building, the empire that would soon swallow his company whole. As coffee was served, Carter's phone rang. He glanced at it, then excused himself to take the call. The moment he stepped away, the tension around the table visibly eased. "Elsa," Lana said quietly, leaning toward me. "Everything is in place for tomorrow. The contracts are finalized. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Matt asked, his voice low. "It will effectively end his career." I stirred my coffee thoughtfully, watching the dark liquid swirl. Carter built his career on dismissing women's capabilities. Perhaps it's fitting that a woman's capabilities will be his undoing. Jessie nodded in agreement. "The board meeting is set for 8:30 a.m. We'll have the papers ready for your signature before the market opens." "And the press release?" I asked. "Scheduled for 9:15, immediately after the official transfer," Lana confirmed. "By lunch, everyone in the business world will know that Nova Hospitality is under new management. Your management." We fell silent. As Carter returned, his face flushed with excitement. "That was Pete from Westbrook Capital," he announced, sliding back into his seat. "They're interested in providing additional funding for our expansion. Said they've heard great things about our operation." I hid my smile behind my coffee cup. Pete Williams was my oldest friend and earliest investor in Nova. The operation he was interested in wasn't Carter's struggling company, but the acquisition we'd been planning for months. "Wonderful news, dear," I replied, the picture of wifely support. "This calls for a toast," Carter declared, signaling for another round. "To the future of Stewart Enterprises, and to the perfect wife who makes it all possible by knowing exactly where she belongs." The final hour of the dinner was the most difficult to endure. Carter had moved beyond his usual condescension into something more pointed, more deliberately belittling. Perhaps it was the extra scotch, or maybe the false confidence from Pete's call, but he seemed determined to put me in my place more thoroughly than ever before. "You know," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I was talking to my friend Hector last week. He runs that investment firm downtown. And he mentioned how his wife tried to start a catering business." He chuckled. "Cute little attempt. Lasted about 3 months before she realized she was in over her head. That's the difference between men and women in business. We understand perseverance, strategy, the long game." I thought about the meeting I'd had with Hector Reynolds last month, where his firm had agreed to finance Nova's next round of expansion. I thought about his wife's cute little attempt, a catering company that she'd sold last year for 8 figures, allowing her to become a silent partner in her husband's firm. I thought about how neither of them had bothered to tell Carter the truth, recognizing, as I had, that some men prefer their comforting illusions. "Some women just don't have what it takes," Carter continued, warming to his theme. "They get emotional. Take things personally. In business, you need to be cold, calculated." I nodded attentively, thinking about the calculated moves I'd been making for years. Each acquisition, each partnership, each step toward this very moment. Cold? Perhaps, but necessarily so. As the evening drew to a close, Carter was riding high, on his perceived success, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. When the valet brought our car around, Carter handed over a generous tip, his movements loose from the scotch, still chuckling about his clever observations regarding wives and their proper place in the world. "That went perfectly," he slurred, sliding into the passenger seat. For once, I was grateful for his drinking. It gave me a legitimate reason to drive, and more importantly, to stop by my office on the way home. "Just need to pick up something I left at my charity office," I said casually as I turned down Fifth Avenue. Carter merely grunted, his head already lolling against the window. He'd never once visited what he called my little charity project in the 8 years since I'd told him I was doing volunteer work. The truth was far more interesting. The gleaming 40-story building housed the headquarters of Nova Hospitality Group. I pulled into the private underground garage, parking in my reserved spot marked CEO. Carter was already softly snoring. "I'll just be a minute, dear," I whispered, though he was far too gone to hear me. The elevator recognized my fingerprint, shooting straight up to the executive floor. At 11:30 p.m., the office was quiet, but not empty. Chloe Winters, my COO, was waiting in my office, along with our legal team and Pete Williams from Westbrook Capital. The wall of windows behind my desk offered a spectacular view of the city lights, but tonight none of us were interested in the scenery. "That was quite a performance your husband put on," Pete said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I don't know how you've managed to keep this secret for so long, Elsa." I settled behind my desk, the familiar leather chair grounding me after hours of playing a role that had grown increasingly suffocating over the years. "Carter sees what he expects to see," I replied, "and he expects to see just a housewife." Chloe slid a folder across my desk. "The final paperwork is ready. Once you sign these, Stewart Enterprises will officially become a subsidiary of Nova Hospitality Group." "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Pete asked quietly. "It will effectively bankrupt him. There's no coming back from this kind of public humiliation." I opened the folder, uncapping my Mont Blanc pen, a gift I'd given myself after my first successful restaurant chain acquisition 5 years ago. "Carter built his business on 3 major pillars," I said, looking up at my colleagues, my friends who had kept my secret all these years. "The Meridian Partnership, Westbrook's financing, and the Turner Group's distribution network." I paused, the pen hovering over the signature line. For a moment, I thought about all the times Carter had genuinely shown me kindness, the moments between the condescension when he'd been a loving husband. I thought about the early days of our marriage, before his success had amplified his worst tendencies, when he'd still seen me as a partner, not just an accessory. Then I remembered tonight's dinner, his voice echoing, "Just a housewife." I remembered the countless women who'd been in my position but lacked the resources or opportunity to fight back. I remembered the young female executives at my company, watching to see if I would finally stand up for myself, for all of us. I signed the final document with a flourish. "And as of tomorrow morning, all 3 will be exclusively contracted with Nova Hospitality." "He never once suspected?" Chloe asked, shaking her head in disbelief. "Even though you've been outperforming his company for the past 3 years, I closed the folder with a decisive snap. Carter's ego wouldn't allow him to see it. Do you know he actually laughed when he heard rumors that Nova was run by a woman? Said it had to be fake news because women don't have the killer instinct for big business. "Well, he's about to learn otherwise," Pete said, gathering the signed papers. "The press release is scheduled for 9:15 a.m. tomorrow. Your husband's company will lose 60% of its business value within the first hour of trading." I stood, smoothing my dress. "Have our PR team ready. Once this breaks, there will be questions about why I kept my identity hidden for so long. We need to control the narrative." "And Carter?" Chloe asked. "What will you tell him?" A sad smile crossed my face. "The truth, that while he was busy telling everyone I was just a housewife, I was busy building an empire that just acquired his company." I checked my phone. A text from my driver confirming Carter was still sound asleep in the car. "It's ironic," Pete mused, gathering his things. "If he had ever bothered to attend one of your charity fundraisers, he might have noticed they were actually industry networking events. If he'd ever asked about your cooking classes. But he didn't, I finished, because in his mind, I was just a housewife. And tomorrow, he'll learn exactly what this housewife is capable of. We rode down in the elevator together, these powerful executives who had become my closest allies. They had seen past the facade I presented at Carter's dinners, recognized the business acumen I wielded quietly but effectively. "Your car is ready, Ms. Stewart," my security guard said as we reached the garage. The others walked to their own vehicles while I returned to where Carter slept, blissfully unaware that in less than 10 hours, his carefully constructed world would collapse. As I drove us home through the quiet city streets, I thought about the moment 8 years ago when I'd chosen to keep my professional life separate from my marriage. It had seemed easier then, simpler to let Carter believe what he wanted about his wife's capabilities. But tonight's dinner had confirmed what I'd known for months. The time for hiding was over. "Had a great night," Carter mumbled as I helped him into bed. "Showed everyone what a perfect wife you are." I watched him fall back asleep, already dreading tomorrow's hangover more than he could possibly imagine. "Yes, dear," I whispered. "Tomorrow, you'll see exactly what kind of wife you have." I barely slept that night, my mind racing with preparations for the day ahead. While Carter would wake to the worst day of his professional life, I would be stepping fully into the light after years, in the shadows. I rose before dawn, slipping quietly from our bedroom and into my home office. The space, which Carter referred to as my little hobby room, contained more evidence of my double life than any other place. Behind a false bookshelf lay a secure computer system that connected directly to Nova's servers. The artwork on the walls, pieces Carter dismissed as decorative, were actually investments worth millions, selected by the same art consultant who curated the collection at Nova's headquarters. I opened my closet, pushing past the demure dresses Carter preferred, to the back section where I kept my executive wardrobe. For today, I selected a tailored navy suit, powerful but not ostentatious. Today wasn't about flaunting power. It was about claiming what had always been mine. By 6:30 a.m., I was dressed and ready. I paused in the doorway of our bedroom, watching Carter sleep. Despite everything, there was a part of me that ached for what might have been. If he had seen me truly, if he had valued me as an equal, if he had ever bothered to look beyond his own assumptions. "Goodbye, Carter," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. "The housewife is going to work." The early morning streets were quiet as my driver took me to Nova headquarters. Dawn was just breaking over the city skyline, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers. I thought about how long I'd lived in the shadows of Carter's expectations, and how today I would finally step into the light. By 7 a.m., I was in my office at Nova Hospitality Group, watching the early morning light paint the city in shades of gold. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I'd arrived. Everyone wanted confirmation that we were moving forward with what the business press would soon dub the housewife coup. "The press release is ready," Chloe announced as she entered my office. "We've got exclusive interviews lined up with CNBC, Bloomberg, and the Wall Street Journal. They're particularly interested in the human angle, the CEO who hid in plain sight." I skimmed the press release on my tablet, making a few minor adjustments. "Make sure they understand this isn't about revenge," I said firmly. "It's about business. Meridian, Westbrook, and the Turner Group are making a strategic decision to partner with the firm that's shown the best performance over the past 5 years. I paused, then added, "Even if that decision bankrupts my husband." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Especially then." For years, I had maintained a careful separation between my personal and professional lives. At home, I was Elsa Stewart, supportive wife. In this office, I was Elsa Bennett, my maiden name, visionary CEO. Today, those two identities would finally merge, and the world would know the truth. My executive team began to assemble in the conference room adjacent to my office. These were the people who had helped me build Nova, who had kept my secret all these years. Many of them had worked with me since the beginning, when Nova was just a single restaurant with ambitious plans. "Ms. Bennett," my assistant appeared at the door. "The board members are assembling on the video conference. They'd like a final word before the announcement." I nodded, gathering my tablet. The Nova board had been supportive of the acquisition, recognizing the strategic value of absorbing Stewart Enterprises. They also understood the personal dimension, though none had commented directly on it. In business, results speak louder than personal drama. The video conference was brief and to the point. The board unanimously reaffirmed their support for the acquisition and for me personally. They understood that today's revelation about my identity would create a media storm, but they were confident that Nova's performance would ultimately be what people remembered. I checked my watch. 7:30 a.m. "Has Carter's assistant arrived at his office yet?" Chloe nodded, a slight smirk playing at her lips. "Hector reported he just stumbled in looking worse for wear. He said Carter's already demanded 3 aspirin and keeps mumbling about last night's successful dinner." I pulled up the live feed from my executive boardroom on one of my office wall screens. The energy was electric. Everyone knew what was coming. 8 years of secrecy were about to end, and with it, Carter's illusions of superiority. "Ms. Stewart," my assistant appeared at the door. "Lana Blackwood is on line 1. She says Carter's been trying to reach her all morning." A small smile crossed my face as I picked up the phone. "Lana?" "Yes, everything's proceeding as planned." "Is he getting nervous?" "He's left 6 messages already," Lana replied, amusement evident in her voice. "Apparently, he's trying to schedule a follow-up meeting to close the deal from last night. Should I tell him I'm busy signing contracts with Nova Hospitality?" "Let him sweat a little longer," I said, checking the time again. 8:15 a.m. The press release goes live in 1 hour. Have your team ready to announce the transition of all Meridian accounts to Nova immediately after. I spent the next 30 minutes coordinating with our legal team, ensuring every detail was perfect. Carter's company would lose not just Meridian's business, but all associated subsidiaries and partner corporations. It would be a clean sweep. As I reviewed the final contracts, my mind drifted back to how Nova Hospitality had begun. 8 years ago, I was already an established restaurateur with 3 successful venues when I met Carter. At a charity gala, he had approached me, confident and charming, assuming I was there as someone's date rather than as a donor in my own right. "Let me guess," he'd said, handing me a champagne flute. "Interior design, or maybe fashion?" I'd smiled, amused by his presumption. "Restaurants, actually." "Ah, you work at a restaurant? Hostess? Manager?" he'd asked, his interest clearly piqued. I'd considered correcting him, explaining that I owned the restaurant where the gala was being held, along with 2 others. Instead, something made me play along. "Something like that," I'd replied. That night set the pattern for our entire relationship. Carter saw what he wanted to see: a beautiful woman who would complement his rising status, someone to manage his home and social calendar while he built his empire. I saw potential too, not just in him as a partner, but in the freedom his assumptions gave me. Our courtship was swift. Within 6 months we were married, and I had made a calculated decision. I would keep my business life separate from our marriage. It wasn't a choice made out of deception, but out of pragmatism. The few times I'd tried to discuss business with Carter, he'd patted my hand and changed the subject to something he deemed more suitable for my interests. So I created a new professional identity. Elsa Bennett would continue to run and expand Nova Hospitality, while Elsa Stewart would play the role of devoted wife. It wasn't difficult to maintain the separation. Carter showed so little interest in my activities that I could spend entire days at Nova headquarters without him ever questioning where I'd been. "Just finalizing the menu for your dinner party," I would say, when in reality I'd been negotiating multi-million-dollar financing. "Looking at new curtain samples," I'd explain, after spending the morning acquiring our fourth restaurant location. As Nova grew, so did the complexity of maintaining my dual identity. I established a small office in a separate building that I called my charity headquarters, where Carter could reach me if needed. The real work happened at Nova's downtown high-rise, where my executive team helped maintain the careful fiction of my separate identities. By our third anniversary, Nova had expanded to 15 locations across 3 states. By our fifth, we were the fastest-growing restaurant group on the West Coast, with 32 properties and a reputation for innovation and excellence. All while Carter believed I was occupied with women's work, planning parties, decorating our home, and managing what he assumed was a small charity supporting culinary education for underprivileged youth. That charity did exist. It was one of my proudest achievements. But it was just one small piece of the empire I was building while playing the role of just a housewife. Last year, when Nova began considering expansion opportunities, Stewart Enterprises appeared on our radar. Carter's company owned prime real estate in key markets we wanted to enter, and their business model complemented ours in several strategic ways. The acquisition made perfect business sense. What began as a purely business decision took on a personal dimension as Carter's behavior grew increasingly dismissive. Perhaps his company's struggles were affecting his ego, making him more determined to assert his superiority at home. The more he emphasized my role as just a housewife, the more resolved I became to finally bring my two worlds together. At 8:45, my phone lit up with Carter's face on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail, imagining his hangover-induced frustration as he tried to figure out why none of his major clients were returning his calls. "Ms. Stewart?" Chloe appeared again. "Everything is in place. The market opens in 15 minutes. Our investors are ready to respond to the volatility we're expecting when the news breaks." I stood, straightening my tailored blazer, a far cry from the demure dress I'd worn at dinner last night. "Tell everyone I'll be on the trading floor for the announcement. They deserve to see this in person." The energy in our corporate headquarters was palpable as I walked through. These people had kept my secret for years, had helped build Nova Hospitality Group into an industry powerhouse, while maintaining the fiction that we were just another restaurant company. Today, they would see their loyalty rewarded. The trading floor at Nova wasn't like those at investment banks. We didn't trade stocks, but we did monitor market movements closely, especially those affecting the hospitality industry. Today, all eyes were on the screens displaying Stewart Enterprises' stock price, currently holding steady before the market opening. 2 minutes to the bell, someone called out as I entered. The room quieted momentarily as everyone noticed my presence, then erupted in a spontaneous round of applause. These people knew better than anyone what today meant. Not just the business victory, but the personal vindication. I nodded my acknowledgement, touched by their support, but focused on what was about to unfold. On the main screen, a countdown to market open ticked away the seconds. At 8:57, my phone buzzed again. Carter. This time I answered. "Darling." His voice was tense despite his attempt at casualness. "Have you heard from Lana Blackwood this morning? Or Jesse Martinez? I can't seem to reach anyone from Meridian." "I'm sure they're just busy," I replied smoothly, watching the seconds tick down on the office's massive digital clock. Important executives. Important meetings. But the contracts were supposed to be signed this morning. Carter's voice rose slightly. "After last night's dinner, it should have been a formality. Elsa, are you sure you didn't say something to offend them? Sometimes you can be a bit, well, you know." I checked my watch. 8:59 a.m. "Actually, Carter, I think they were very impressed by last night's dinner, particularly your observations about housewives and their proper place in business." "What? Elsa, what are you talking about? This is serious business, not some dinner party planning." The market opening bell rang, cutting him off. On every screen in the office, the press release began to appear. I watched as Carter's company's stock ticker started to flash red. "Turn on CNBC," I said quietly into the phone. "What? Why would I?" "Just do it, Carter." I could hear the TV in the background of his office coming to life, followed by the anchor's voice. Breaking news in the restaurant sector as Nova Hospitality Group, led by CEO Elsa Stewart, announces the exclusive acquisition of Stewart Enterprises. This comes as Meridian Investments, Westbrook Capital, and the Turner Group all terminate their contracts with Stewart Enterprises to partner exclusively with Nova. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. "Elsa?" Carter's voice was barely a whisper. "What is this?" I watched his company's stock price begin its free fall on the digital ticker. "This, Carter, is what happens when you underestimate someone for being just a housewife." The office erupted in controlled chaos around me as the market responded to the news, but I remained still, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my husband's world crumble in real time. "I'll be home early today," I said finally. "I think we need to talk about my career in restaurant management." The trading floor continued to buzz with activity behind me as I made my way back to my office. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating since the announcement, a mix of congratulatory messages from industry leaders and increasingly desperate calls from Carter. The planning for this day had begun 6 months ago, when Nova's board first approved, exploring the acquisition of Stewart Enterprises. I had initially recused myself from discussions due to the obvious conflict of interest, but the board insisted I stay involved. The strategic fit was too perfect to ignore for personal reasons. "We'll need to approach this delicately," Lana had advised during our first strategy session. "The moment Carter realizes you're behind Nova, he'll fight the acquisition out of pure ego. Then we ensure he doesn't realize until it's too late," I had replied. The strategy was meticulous. First, we identified the 3 key relationships that kept Stewart Enterprises afloat: Meridian's investments, Westbrook's financing, and the Turner Group's distribution network. Then, we quietly approached each with better offers, contingent on exclusive partnerships with Nova post-acquisition. "What if one of them tips Carter off?" Pete had asked during a late-night planning session. "They won't," I had assured him. "Each has too much to gain from this deal, and they've all witnessed Carter's behavior firsthand. They know which horse to back in this race." The second phase involved timing. We needed to ensure all contracts expired within the same 30-day window, creating a perfect storm that would leave Stewart Enterprises vulnerable. Legal worked overtime to draft agreements that were ironclad but could be executed quickly when the moment came. "The press will be a challenge," Chloe had pointed out. "They'll focus on the personal drama rather than the business strategy." Then we control the narrative, I had decided. We emphasize Nova's performance, the strategic fit, and the unanimous support of all major stakeholders. My identity as Carter's wife becomes a footnote, not the headline. The most delicate phase was maintaining secrecy as the plan progressed. Carter's own behaviors made this easier than anticipated. His absolute certainty that his wife couldn't possibly understand complex business matters created the perfect blind spot. Even when rumors circulated about Nova's female CEO, he dismissed them without ever making the connection. "Elsa." His voice cracked through the speaker when I finally answered again. "What the hell is happening? My stock is down 50% already. Meridian just pulled all their contracts. Westbrook too, even the Turner Group. They're all saying something about exclusive deals with Nova Hospitality. This has to be a mistake." I settled into my chair, watching the numbers tumble across my screens. "It's not a mistake, Carter, though I understand your confusion. After all, what would just a housewife know about corporate acquisitions? What are you—" His voice trailed off, and I could almost see the pieces clicking into place in his mind. "Nova. Stewart. You're the CEO everyone's been talking about?" "The very same." I kept my voice level, professional. The one you said couldn't possibly exist because women don't have the killer instinct for business. The sound of something shattering came through the phone, probably the crystal scotch. Tumbler he kept on his desk. "How long?" he demanded. "How long have you been lying to me?" "Lying?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Carter, I've been running Nova Hospitality for 8 years. I never lied. You just never asked. You were too busy telling everyone what I couldn't do to notice what I was actually doing." The final phase of our strategy had been the most personally challenging, deciding what would happen after the acquisition. The business aspects were straightforward. We would integrate Stewart's properties into the Nova portfolio, retaining the valuable assets and divesting the rest. But the personal implications required more consideration. "Will you stay married?" "To him?" Chloe had asked during one of our final planning sessions, voicing the question no one else dared to ask. I had stared out the window of my office, watching the city lights below. "That depends on him," I'd finally answered. "On whether he can accept who I really am, not who he's decided I should be." "This is insane." Carter's voice rose to a shout, pulling me back to the present. "You can't do this. I'm your husband. And I'm just a housewife, remember?" The words tasted like victory on my tongue. The kind who knows her place. Though it seems my place is at the head of a company that just acquired yours. Through my office windows, I could see the media vans arriving outside our building. The story was spreading faster than even our PR team had anticipated. "My God." Carter's voice had dropped to a whisper. "Last night at dinner, all those things I said about wives knowing their limitations, about women not understanding big business. Yes, I finished for him. That was quite entertaining, especially with the Meridian board right there. Did you know Lana Blackwood has been my mentor for the past 5 years? Another crash from his end of the line? Matt Donovan? Pete Williams? They knew this whole time?" "They all knew, Carter. Every executive at that table last night works with me regularly. Most of them report to me through various subsidiaries." I paused, letting that sink in. "That's why they looked so uncomfortable when you were explaining my capabilities." "Elsa, please." His voice had taken on a pleading tone I'd never heard before. "We can fix this. Whatever I did wrong, however I made you feel, we can work it out. Just call off this takeover." I watched as another alert flashed across my screen. Stewart Enterprises stock had dropped below the critical threshold. Emergency trading holds were being implemented. This isn't about feelings, Carter. It's business, pure and simple. Nova Hospitality made better offers, showed stronger performance, and demonstrated superior market understanding. The fact that it coincides with your public dismissal of my capabilities is just poetic timing. "You've destroyed me," he whispered. "Everything I built." "No, Carter, you did that yourself. Every time you dismissed me, every time you mocked the idea of a woman in business, every time you declared I was just a housewife, you were digging your own grave. I simply waited for you to finish digging." My assistant appeared at the door, signaling that the press was waiting in the conference room. "I have to go," I told Carter. "I have a press conference to attend. Unlike you, I still have a company to run." "Wait." The desperation in his voice was palpable. "What am I supposed to do now?" I stood, straightening my jacket. "I suggest you start by asking your wife for business advice." I allowed myself a small smile. "Oh, wait. You don't believe in that, do you?" As I ended the call, the image of Carter's face appeared on every financial news channel displayed on my office wall. Photos from last night's dinner were juxtaposed with shots of Nova's and Stewart's company logos. The headlines were already running. Nova Hospitality CEO reveals identity, acquires husband's business in historic takeover. I had a few minutes before the press conference, so I reviewed the talking points one last time. We would emphasize the business rationale for the acquisition, the unanimous support of all stakeholders, and Nova's track record of successful integrations. My identity as Carter's wife would be acknowledged but not sensationalized. Just as I was about to leave my office, my phone rang again. It was Jessie Martinez from Meridian. "Elsa," she said without preamble. "Carter's on the warpath. He just stormed into our offices demanding to see Lana. When our security stopped him, he started shouting that we'd been conspiring behind his back with his traitorous wife. It's getting ugly." I closed my eyes briefly. This was the one scenario we hadn't fully planned for. Carter making a public scene that could damage not just his reputation, but potentially Nova's as well. "Have security escort him out," I instructed. Firmly, but respectfully. "No cameras, no scene if possible. And Jessie, make sure your people know not to engage with him directly. He's looking for someone to blame." "Already on it," she assured me. "But you should know, he's threatening legal action against Meridian, against Nova, against you personally. Something about breach of fiduciary duty and spousal rights to business assets." I had anticipated this reaction. Carter's ego wouldn't allow him to accept defeat gracefully. Our legal team had already prepared for various challenges he might mount, including claims to Nova through marital property laws. "Let him try," I said calmly. "Every contract, every business decision has been meticulously documented and is legally sound. He's welcome to waste what's left of his resources on frivolous lawsuits." After hanging up, I received 3 more similar calls in rapid succession, from the Turner Group, from Westbrook Capital, and finally from my head of security. Carter was making the rounds, alternating between threats and pleading, trying to reverse what couldn't be undone. "Ms. Stewart," my assistant appeared again. "Carter is in the lobby demanding to see you. Security is asking for instructions." This was sooner than I expected. I had thought he would exhaust other options before confronting me directly. "Tell them to let him up," I decided. "But have security standing by, and postpone the press conference by 15 minutes. "Are you sure?" Chloe asked, concern evident in her voice. "He sounds pretty volatile right now." "I'm sure," I replied. "He deserves this much at least, to hear it from me directly. Besides, better to have this confrontation in private than in front of cameras." I moved to the window, looking out over the city as I waited. 8 years of marriage, of playing a role, of being underestimated and dismissed, had led to this moment. Part of me felt a profound sadness for what might have been if Carter had ever truly seen me as an equal. Another part felt the righteous satisfaction of finally standing in my truth. A commotion in the outer office signaled Carter's arrival. I turned as the door burst open, revealing my husband. Disheveled, wild-eyed, his normally impeccable appearance in disarray. "How could you do this?" he demanded, his voice raw with emotion. 8 years, Elsa, 8 years of marriage, and this is how you repay my trust?" I regarded him calmly from behind my desk. "What trust, Carter? The trust that I would always be less than you? That I would never challenge your assumptions about what a wife should be?" "I gave you everything," he shouted, gesturing broadly around him. "A beautiful home, financial security, social status." "No," I interrupted firmly. "I gave myself those things. You were just too blind to see it." He paced the office like a caged animal, stopping occasionally to glare at the Nova logo displayed prominently on the wall, at the industry awards bearing my name, at the evidence of my success that had been hiding in plain sight all along. "All those charity events," he muttered, "the cooking classes, the design workshops, all lies?" "Not lies," I corrected. "Just not the complete truth. If you had ever shown genuine interest in my activities, if you had ever truly asked about my day instead of assuming it revolved around homemaking, you might have discovered who I really am years ago." He slammed his fist down on my desk, making the pens jump. "This is theft. You've stolen my company, my clients, my reputation." I didn't flinch. "No, Carter. I made better business offers. Your clients chose to partner with Nova because we demonstrated superior performance and vision. This is the free market at work, something you've always claimed to champion." "I'll fight you," he growled, his face flushed with anger. I'll contest this in court. As your husband, I have rights to your business assets. Actually, you don't, I said calmly. Nova Hospitality Group was established before our marriage, and our prenuptial agreement explicitly excludes pre-existing business interests. As for any appreciation in value during our marriage, well, my legal team has documented every decision, every investment, every step of Nova's growth as separate from our marital assets. But please, by all means, waste what's left of your resources on lawsuits you can't win. Carter stared at me, his anger momentarily displaced by disbelief. Prenuptial agreement? We don't have a prenup. I reached into my desk drawer and extracted a folder, sliding it across to him. Page 12, paragraph 4. Your signature is on page 23. He snatched up the document, flipping through it frantically. I don't remember signing this. You were rather focused on the wedding arrangements, I said evenly. You said, and I quote, "Just handle the boring legal stuff, sweetheart. I trust you." You signed it between approving the menu and selecting the wine pairings. His face contorted as the full weight of his situation began to sink in. Not only had his business been acquired, but his legal recourse was severely limited by documents he'd signed without reading. A cardinal sin in business that he himself had often lectured others about. Why? He asked, his voice suddenly quiet. If you were so successful on your own, why marry me at all? Was it all just some elaborate revenge scheme? Did you target me from the beginning? The question gave me pause. It was one I'd asked myself many times over the years. No, Carter, I said honestly. When we met, I genuinely fell in love with you. You were charming, ambitious, and seemed to appreciate a strong woman. It wasn't until after we were married that I realized you only appreciated strength in women, when it didn't threaten your sense of superiority. I moved from behind my desk, walking to the window that overlooked the city. I kept our worlds separate at first because it was easier. Your dismissive comments about women in business hurt, but I told myself they weren't about me specifically, that if you knew what I was accomplishing, you'd be proud. I turned back to face him. But the more successful Nova became, the more dismissive you became of my capabilities. It was as if you needed to reinforce my inferiority to maintain your own sense of worth. Eventually, I realized you would never see me as your equal, no matter what I achieved. Carter sank into one of the visitor chairs, the fight draining out of him. So all these years, while I thought you were planning dinner parties and charity functions, I was building one of the most successful restaurant groups on the West Coast, I finished for him. The dinner parties were real, by the way. I'm quite good at multitasking. A bitter laugh escaped him. I've been living with a stranger. No, I corrected gently. You've been living with the woman you created, the one who played the role you assigned her because you never bothered to discover who she really was. For a moment, I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. Had it been necessary to orchestrate such a complete dismantling of Carter's business and ego? Could I have found another way to assert my identity without destroying what he had built? I thought about the countless times I'd tried to engage him in serious conversations about my ambitions, only to be patted on the head and dismissed. I remembered the dinner parties where he'd mocked the very idea of women's business acumen while I sat, silently by, protecting his ego at the expense of my dignity. No, I decided. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Carter decided that his wife could never be his equal. What happens now? He asked, looking suddenly older than his 42 years. I returned to my desk, the familiar leather chair grounding me in my resolve. Now I have a press conference to attend. Nova has acquired Stewart Enterprises in a straightforward business transaction. The press will focus on the personal angle, but the markets will look at the numbers. And the numbers favor Nova. And us? He pressed. Our marriage? I studied the man I had married 8 years ago, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. That depends, I said carefully. Can you handle being married to someone who isn't just a housewife? Someone who won't sit quietly while you mock her capabilities. Someone who might actually understand business better than you do? Carter stood slowly, straightening his tie in a futile attempt to regain some dignity. I don't know, he admitted, the first honest thing he'd said all morning. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. You could have told me, given me a chance to understand. I gave you chances every day for 8 years, Carter, I replied quietly. Every time I offered an opinion, you dismissed it. Every time I made a suggestion, you ignored it. Every time you told someone I was just a housewife, you were choosing not to see who I really was. He nodded slowly, finally understanding. And now everyone sees. Yes, I agreed. Now everyone sees. As the door closed behind him, I turned to look out over the city, my city, built restaurant by restaurant while playing the role he had assigned me. On the screens behind me, Stewart Enterprises stock had been suspended from trading, while Nova Hospitality shares soared. Just a housewife indeed. My assistant knocked gently before entering. The press is waiting, Ms. Stewart, and the board. Would like a brief word before you go public. I nodded, gathering my tablet and smoothing my jacket. Tell them I'll be right there. Left alone for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full range of emotions I'd been suppressing. Satisfaction at the successful execution of our strategy, vindication after years of being underestimated, but also a profound sadness for the partnership that might have been if Carter had ever truly seen me. I opened my desk drawer and took out a small framed photo. Carter and me on our wedding day, both smiling, full of hope for our future together. I traced his face with my finger, remembering the man I'd fallen in love with before his success had amplified his worst tendencies. Perhaps someday he would understand that today's events weren't about revenge, but liberation. Not just for me, but potentially for him as well. Liberation from the exhausting performance of superiority he felt compelled to maintain, from the narrow definition of success that had consumed him. Or perhaps he wouldn't. Perhaps he would cling to his anger and resentment, casting himself as the victim of a calculating wife, rather than confronting his own role in creating this situation. Either way, my path forward was clear. I replaced the photo in the drawer and straightened my shoulders, ready to step fully into the light after years in the shadows. Ms. Stewart? My assistant called from the doorway. It's time. Coming, I replied, leaving behind the last vestiges of doubt. And Angela? From now on, let's use Bennett Stewart. It's time the world knew exactly who I am. I spent the next 30 minutes coordinating with our legal team, ensuring every detail was perfect. Carter's company would lose not just Meridian's business, but all associated subsidiaries and partner corporations. It would be a clean sweep. The planning for this acquisition had been meticulous, executed with a precision that would have impressed even Carter had he known about it. 6 months ago, when Nova's board first identified Stewart Enterprises as a potential acquisition target, I had initially recused myself, citing the obvious conflict of interest. But the board insisted I remain involved. The strategic fit was too perfect to ignore for personal reasons. From a pure business perspective, Stewart complements our portfolio perfectly, our CFO had argued. Their properties are in markets where we want to expand, their supply chain could be integrated with ours for significant cost savings, and their brand identity could be either maintained for certain demographics or folded into ours where appropriate. She was right, of course. The acquisition made perfect business sense regardless of my personal connection to the company. So I had agreed to lead the process, with additional oversight from the board to ensure complete transparency and proper corporate governance. Every decision, every move had been documented meticulously, knowing that once Carter discovered my role, legal challenges would inevitably follow. Our strategy unfolded in 3 carefully orchestrated phases. First, We identified Stewart Enterprises' three key business relationships. Meridian's investments provided their operating capital, Westbrook's financing underwrote their expansion efforts, and the Turner Group's distribution network kept their supply chain functioning. These partnerships were Carter's pride, relationships he'd cultivated personally and considered unshakable. What he failed to realize was that these same companies had been working with Nova for years, quietly comparing our performance metrics against Stewart's. When approached about potentially shifting their allegiance, all three had required minimal persuasion. Business was business after all, and Nova consistently outperformed Stewart across every meaningful metric. The second phase involved timing. We needed all three relationships to transition simultaneously, creating a perfect storm that would leave Stewart too vulnerable to resist our acquisition offer. Legal worked overtime to ensure the contracts would expire within the same 30-day window, with new agreements with Nova ready to be implemented immediately thereafter. "What if one of them tips Carter off?" Pete had asked during a late-night planning session. "They won't," I had assured him. "Each has too much to gain from this deal, and they've all witnessed Carter's behavior firsthand. They know which horse to back in this race." The third phase, the one we were executing now, involved managing public perception. We prepared two distinct narratives, one focusing on the business rationale for the acquisition, highlighting Nova's track record of successful integrations and the complementary nature of the two companies. The other acknowledging but downplaying the personal connection, framing my identity as a footnote rather than the headline. "The press will be a challenge," Chloe had pointed out. "They'll focus on the personal drama rather than the business strategy." Then we control the narrative, I had decided. We emphasize Nova's performance, the strategic fit, and the unanimous support of all major stakeholders. My identity as Carter's wife becomes a footnote, not the headline. Now, on the eve of the Yaorzhi announcement, every element was in place. The contracts with Meridian, Westbrook, and Turner were signed and securely filed. The press release was drafted, reviewed by legal, and scheduled for distribution at precisely 9:15 a.m. Our investor relations team had prepared talking points for analysts, emphasizing the business case for the acquisition. Human resources had developed transition plans for Stewart employees, identifying key talent to retain and preparing generous severance packages for the rest. Most importantly, our legal team had assembled exhaustive documentation proving that every aspect of the acquisition was conducted with proper corporate governance and disclosures, anticipating the inevitable challenges Carter would mount once he discovered my role. At 8:45, my phone lit up with Carter's face on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail, imagining his hangover-induced frustration as he tried to figure out why none of his major clients were returning his calls. This was the beginning of the unraveling, the first loose thread that would eventually unravel his entire business tapestry. "Ms. Stewart," Chloe appeared again. "Everything is in place. The market opens in 15 minutes. Our investors are ready to respond to the volatility we're expecting when the news breaks." I stood, straightening my tailored blazer, a far cry from the demure dress I'd worn at dinner last night. This suit, a custom-made navy wool with subtle power shoulders, had been hanging in my office closet for weeks, waiting for this moment, the day I would finally step fully into my public role as Nova's CEO. "Tell everyone I'll be on the trading floor for the announcement. They deserve to see this in person." The energy in our corporate headquarters was palpable as I walked through the open concept office. Engineers paused their coding, marketing. Teams looked up from their campaign planning, and administrative staff stood from their desks as I passed. These people had kept my secret for years, maintaining the fiction that Nova was led by an anonymous CEO, while I played the role of just a housewife in my private life. Today, they would witness the culmination of our collective efforts, the moment when both worlds finally merged. The trading floor at Nova wasn't like those at investment banks. We didn't trade stocks, but we did monitor market movements closely, especially those affecting the hospitality industry. Today, all eyes were on the screens displaying Stewart Enterprises' stock price, currently holding steady before the market opening. 2 minutes to the bell, someone called out as I entered. The room quieted momentarily as everyone noticed my presence, then erupted in a spontaneous round of applause. These people knew better than anyone what today meant. Not just the business victory, but the personal vindication. I nodded my acknowledgement, touched by their support, but focused on what was about to unfold. On the main screen, a countdown to market open ticked away the seconds. At 8:57, my phone buzzed again. Carter. This time I answered. Darling. His voice was tense despite his attempt at casualness. Have you heard from Lana Blackwood this morning? Or Jesse Martinez? I can't seem to reach anyone from Meridian. I'm sure they're just busy, I replied smoothly, watching the seconds tick down on the office's massive digital clock. Important executives? Important meetings? But the contracts were supposed to be signed this morning. Carter's voice rose slightly. After last night's dinner, it should have been a formality. Elsa, are you sure you didn't say something to offend them? Sometimes you can be a bit, well, you know. I checked my watch. 8:59 a.m. In 1 minute, everything would change. 8. Years of hiding in plain sight, of building an empire while being dismissed as just a housewife, were about to culminate in this perfect moment of revelation. Actually, Carter, I think they were very impressed by last night's dinner, particularly your observations about housewives and their proper place in business. The days following the announcement passed in a whirlwind of activity. Nova's acquisition of Stewart Enterprises dominated business news, with commentators endlessly dissecting both the strategic fit and the personal drama. Some praised the bold move as business brilliance, while others questioned the ethics of a wife acquiring her husband's company without his knowledge. Through it all, I maintained the composed professionalism that had defined my career, focusing public statements on the business rationale while deflecting questions about my marriage. The markets, at least, had rendered their verdict clearly. Nova's stock continued to climb while what remained of Stewart Enterprises plummeted further. On the third evening after the announcement, I finally returned to the home Carter and I had shared. I hadn't been back since the morning of the announcement, staying instead in the corporate apartment Nova maintained for visiting executives. But tonight, I needed to retrieve essential items and face whatever remained of my personal life. Ducker. House was dark when I arrived, with no sign of Carter's car in the driveway. Using my key, I entered silently, half expecting to find the place in disarray, a physical manifestation of the chaos I'd brought to his professional life. Instead, the house was immaculate, everything in its proper place. The only evidence of disruption was a half-empty bottle of scotch on the kitchen counter and a single glass beside it. I moved through the rooms that had once defined my role as just a housewife, seeing them now with new eyes. The gourmet kitchen, where I'd hosted Carter's business dinners. The elegant living room where I'd smiled politely while he held forth on topics he believed beyond my comprehension. The study where he'd retreated to handle important business matters, too complex for his wife to understand. In our bedroom, I found a note propped against my pillow, written in Carter's distinctive hand. Elsa, I'm staying at the lake house while I sort through the wreckage of what you've left me. 8 years of marriage, and I never knew you at all. Perhaps that's on me as much as it is on you. Carter. I sat on the edge of the bed, the note light in my hand, but heavy in its implications. For the first time, Carter was acknowledging his own role in our situation, a small but significant shift from his initial fury. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Final dissolution papers ready for your review. Court date set for next week. The business dissolution was proceeding smoothly, with Nova's integration team already working to absorb the valuable parts of Stewart Enterprises while divesting the rest. The personal dissolution would take longer, not just the legal untangling of our marriage. but the emotional processing of 8 years spent living parallel lives under the same roof. As I packed a suitcase with the essentials I'd need for the coming weeks, I paused at the framed photo on my nightstand, Carter and me on our honeymoon in Santorini, both smiling in the golden Mediterranean sunset. I left it where it stood, a reminder of what had been and what might have been, had either of us made different choices. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, the first day of living wholly as Elsa Bennett Stewart, no longer compartmentalizing my identity between wife and CEO. The masks were off, the walls between my worlds demolished. I was, at last, fully myself. 2 weeks after the acquisition announcement, I sat in the conference room at Nova headquarters, surrounded by my executive team. The integration of Stewart Enterprises was proceeding according to plan, with key properties already being rebranded under the Nova umbrella. "The financial projections are exceeding expectations," Jesse reported, sliding a folder across the table. "The market has responded even more positively than we anticipated to the combined entity." "And the former Stewart employees?" I asked, my primary concern being for the staff who had been caught in the crossfire of this corporate and personal upheaval. "Most have accepted our transition packages," Chloe replied. "The key personnel we identified have all agreed to stay on. There's been some uncertainty, of course, but overall the integration teams report positive reception." My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Settlement offer received from Carter's team. Less aggressive than expected. Worth reviewing." I had been bracing for a protracted legal battle, with Carter fighting the acquisition and divorce proceedings every step of the way. This message suggested a potential shift in his approach. "Let's take 15, I announced to the team, needing a moment to process this development. Alone in my office, I reviewed the settlement terms my lawyer had forwarded. They were, indeed, surprisingly reasonable. Carter was requesting a fair division of our personal assets, but making no claims on Nova or its acquisition of Stewart. He was, effectively, conceding defeat on the business front. A note was attached at the end of the formal legal document. "Elsa, I've had time to reflect. You're right, I never really saw you. I built a narrative about who you were and what you were capable of that suited my own ego. And then I got angry when reality didn't match my fiction. I'm still processing the fact that my wife systematically acquired my company while I was busy underestimating her. Part of me is furious. Another part is, reluctantly, impressed. I'm ready to end this chapter without further battle. Not because I'm being generous, but because I recognize when I'm outmatched. Carter." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. Perhaps the most honest communication we'd had in years. My assistant knocked gently. "Ms. Bennett Stewart, the Wall Street Journal profile writer is here for your interview." I took a deep breath, tucking the settlement offer into my drawer. "Send her in." The reporter entered, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes alight with curiosity. "Thank you for making time, Ms. Bennett Stewart. Your story has captivated the business world." "Please call me Elsa," I replied, gesturing for her to take a seat. "Elsa, then," she smiled, setting up her recorder. "Let's start at the beginning. Before the restaurants, before Nova, before Carter Stewart. What shaped the woman who built an empire while being dismissed as just a housewife?" I considered the question, thinking about my journey from ambitious young restaurateur to hidden CEO to public vindication. So many moments had led to this. 1. Each dismissal strengthening my resolve, each success carefully concealed until the perfect moment for revelation. "I learned early on," I began, "that being underestimated can be your greatest advantage, if you know how to use it." The Wall Street Journal profile was published on a Sunday, occupying the entire front page of the business section with the headline, "The CEO Who Hid in Plain Sight, How Elsa Bennett Stewart Built a Restaurant Empire While Being Dismissed as Just a Housewife." The piece was fair but unflinching, detailing my journey from culinary school graduate to restaurant owner to hidden CEO. It explored the dynamics of my marriage to Carter, his persistent underestimation of my capabilities, and the strategic acquisition that had finally revealed my true identity to the world. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the article appeared online at midnight. Industry leaders, former colleagues, and surprisingly, several of Carter's business associates had reached out with messages ranging from congratulatory to apologetic. "You've started a movement," Chloe observed, scrolling through social media on her tablet. The hashtag, "Not Just a Housewife," is trending nationally. Women are sharing their own stories of being underestimated. I hadn't anticipated becoming a symbol for women's empowerment in business. My decisions had been personal, strategic, calculated, focused on building Nova Hospitality into an industry leader while navigating the constraints of a marriage to a man who couldn't see beyond his own assumptions. Yet here I was, suddenly the face of a larger conversation about gender, perception, and power in the business world. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at Nova headquarters. My assistant's voice came through the intercom, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Ms. Bennett Stewart, Carter Stewart is here. He's asking to see you." I paused, considering my options. Our lawyers had been finalizing the settlement details, but we hadn't spoken directly since the day of the announcement. "Send him in," I decided. Carter entered, looking both familiar and strange. The same man I'd been married to for 8 years, yet somehow fundamentally altered. He'd lost weight, and a touch of gray had appeared at his temples that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "I read the article," he said without preamble, standing awkwardly by the door rather than taking a seat. "And?" I prompted, when he didn't. "Continue." "It was illuminating," he admitted. "Seeing our marriage from your perspective, seeing myself through your eyes." I remained silent, waiting. "I came to return this," he said finally, placing a small velvet box on my desk. Inside was the diamond pendant he'd given me on our 5th anniversary. "You left it at the house. It seemed significant." I remembered the night he'd given it to me, right after I'd closed the deal to acquire our 20th restaurant, though he hadn't known that was the reason for my good mood. He'd attributed my happiness to the new kitchen renovation I'd commissioned, never imagining I was celebrating a multi-million-dollar business milestone. "Keep it," I said quietly. "A souvenir of who we were." He picked up the box again, turning it in his hands. "Who were we, Elsa? Was any of it real?" The question caught me off guard with its raw honesty. "Parts of it were," I answered truthfully. "I did love you, Carter. That wasn't a lie. I just couldn't love the box you tried to put me in." He nodded slowly, finally understanding. "The settlement. Papers are signed," he said. "It's done." "Yes," I agreed. "It's done." After Carter left, I stood by the window of my office, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as dusk descended. The finality of his visit, returning the pendant, confirming the settlement, marked the true end of our marriage more definitively than any legal document could. 3 months after the revelation that shook the financial world, I sat in the same office reviewing the latest quarterly reports. Nova Hospitality had not just survived the media storm, we'd thrived in it. Our stock had doubled, and the story of the CEO who built an empire while being dismissed as just a housewife had become legend in business circles. "Ms. Bennett Stewart." My assistant appeared at the door. "The divorce papers have been finalized. They just need your signature." I nodded, accepting the folder he handed me. Carter had finally stopped fighting the inevitable 2 weeks ago, after his failed attempt to claim partial ownership of Nova Hospitality through marriage rights, a suggestion that made every female executive in the city collectively roll their eyes. As I signed the last page, officially ending 8 years of marriage, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief, certainly, sadness for what might have been, but predominantly a sense of freedom, of finally being able to live as my complete self, without compartmentalizing my identity to accommodate someone else's limitations. Also, my assistant continued, Time magazine is here for the Person of the Year photo shoot. The irony wasn't lost on me. From just a housewife to Person of the Year in 3 months, the photographer set up while I reviewed the morning's trades. The headline on Bloomberg caught my eye. Stewart Enterprises. Files for Chapter 11. Former CEO steps down. Below it was a photo of Carter leaving his lawyer's office, looking aged beyond his years. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of regret. Not for the acquisition, that had been sound business strategy, but for the relationship that had become so twisted by his inability to see me as an equal. Ms. Bennett Stewart, the Time photographer called, how would you like to be portrayed? I turned to the wall of windows, the city sprawling before me. Just capture me doing what I've always done, running my company. The interview that followed was thoughtful, focusing not just on the dramatic revelation, but on the years of work that led to it, the strategic vision behind Nova's success, and the future of the company post-acquisition. The journalist was particularly interested in the dinner parties. Every major deal we closed started at one of those events, I explained. While Carter thought I was planning menus, I was planning mergers. The business world's biggest players came to my charity functions because that's where the real deals happened. And your husband never suspected? I smiled, remembering Carter's dismissive waves whenever I tried to discuss business. He saw what he expected to see. It's amazing what people will overlook when they've already decided what you're capable of. After the interview, Lana Blackwood stopped by, now a more frequent visitor since the revelation, no longer having to pretend our meetings were about charity events. The business schools want you to speak, she said, settling into the chair Carter had occupied during our last conversation. Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, they all want to hear about the woman who revolutionized how we think about power in business. They want to hear about revenge, I corrected, about a wife taking down her husband. No, Lana shook her head firmly. They want to hear about a brilliant CEO who built something extraordinary while navigating suffocating expectations. The fact that you maintained your cover for 8 years while outperforming every major hospitality group in the region, that's what they want to understand. I glanced at the divorce papers on my desk, now signed and ready to be filed. Carter had finally signed away his claims this morning, accepting the settlement we'd offered. With that, the last tie between us was severed, leaving me free to fully embrace my identity as Elsa Bennett Stewart, no longer compartmentalized between wife and CEO. I'll consider it, I told Lana, though public speaking had never been my preference. I'd always operated best behind the scenes, quietly building while others took center stage. But perhaps that was the old pattern speaking, the habit of hiding my light to accommodate others' comfort. Perhaps it was time to step fully into the spotlight I'd earned. 6 months after the revelation that shook the business world, I stood at the podium in Wharton's largest lecture hall, facing an audience of MBA students eager to hear from the CEO who hid in plain sight. Success doesn't always look the way we're taught it should, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. Sometimes it's built in the margins, in the spaces others don't think to look, by people they don't think to take seriously. The students, particularly the women, leaned forward, visibly engaged. I saw in their faces the recognition of a struggle many of them had experienced firsthand. I didn't set out to create a dual identity, I continued, but when faced with persistent underestimation, I made a strategic choice to use that blind spot to my advantage. While being dismissed as just a housewife, I built Nova Hospitality restaurant by restaurant, deal by deal, always flying just under the radar of those who had decided what I was capable of. After the lecture, a young woman approached me, determination evident in her stance. My father doesn't believe women belong in finance, she said without preamble. He thinks I should focus on finding a husband instead of pursuing my MBA. I recognized in her the same fire that had driven me, the desire to prove wrong those who would limit her potential based on preconceived notions. "What's your name?" I asked. "Jessie," she replied. "Jessie Chen." "Well, Jessie Chen," I said, "remember this. Other people's limitations are not your own. Their inability to see your potential doesn't diminish it." She straightened, something in my words clearly resonating. "Thank you, Ms. Bennett Stewart." "Elsa," I corrected with a smile. "And when you graduate, send your resume to Nova. We're always looking for talent that others have underestimated." As my car pulled away from the campus, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. "Merger with East Coast Restaurant Group approved by both boards. You were right. They were more receptive after the quarterly numbers came in." I smiled, looking out at the city passing by. The acquisition of Carter's company had been just one chapter in Nova's story. Now we were writing the next, expanding nationally, innovating within the industry, building something that would outlast any personal drama that had accompanied its growth. 3 months after my Wharton lecture, I sat in the same office where I'd confronted Carter on the day of the announcement, reviewing the latest quarterly reports. Nova Hospitality had not just survived the transition, we'd thrived, doubling our market share and setting industry records for growth. The media storm had finally subsided, with business publications now focusing on our innovative restaurant concepts rather than the personal drama that had initially captured headlines. The story of the Housewife CEO had evolved into a case study taught in business schools across the country, a testament to strategic patience and the power of being underestimated. On my desk sat the latest issue of Business Weekly with the headline that had become my legacy: "The Wife Who Wasn't: How Underestimation Became the Ultimate Business Strategy." I smiled, remembering Carter's words from that fateful dinner. Just a housewife. Sometimes the smallest underestimation leads to the biggest fall. My phone rang, the special tone I'd assigned to my newest board member, Jessie Chen. After graduating, at the top of her class, she'd joined Nova as a financial analyst, quickly proving herself indispensable. When a board seat opened, I'd nominated her without hesitation, knowing the fresh perspective she brought would be valuable as we continued to expand. "The London acquisition is finalized," she reported without preamble. "We'll have contracts, ready for your signature by tomorrow morning." "Excellent work," I replied. "How did the previous owners respond to your analysis?" She laughed softly. "They were surprised. Apparently, they weren't expecting someone so young to lead the negotiation." "Their underestimation was our advantage," I noted, pleased that she had learned this most valuable lesson. After finishing the call, I walked to the window that overlooked the city, my city, now dotted with Nova Hospitality properties, each one a testament to what could be built while others weren't paying attention. I thought about Carter, who I'd heard had started a small consulting firm in another state. According to mutual friends, he'd become more reflective, less dismissive of others' capabilities. Perhaps his fall had taught him what my words never could. I thought about the countless women who'd reached out after my story became public, sharing their own experiences of being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as just a wife, a mother, a secretary, an assistant. Many had been inspired to step out of the shadows, to claim credit for their work, to demand recognition for their capabilities. That, more than any business success, had become my most meaningful legacy, the permission I'd somehow granted others to stop hiding their light, to stop diminishing themselves to make others comfortable. My assistant appeared at the door. "Your car is ready, Ms. Bennett Stewart. The investors are expecting you at 7. I gathered my things, preparing for another dinner where deals would be made, strategies formed, alliances built. But unlike the dinners of my past, I wouldn't be smiling silently while men spoke over me. I wouldn't be playing the role of just anything. I would be exactly who I had always been, a CEO who had proven that the greatest power often lies in being underestimated. Just a housewife, I murmured to myself as I left the office, a smile playing at my lips. Sometimes the smallest labels become the most powerful when you redefine what they mean. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.